Let's bring on Mark Hubbard to talk about his new book, Ara, The Life and Legacy of a Notre Dame Legend, the authorized biography of Coach Ara Parseghian. Mark, congratulations on the book.
Well, thank you. It was a labor of love, but took 4 years, and so I'm glad it's now in print and people can enjoy it.
You talk about it being a labor of love. You were there at Notre Dame when Ara was the coach. You became friends with him many years later. How personal was this story for you to tell, and why was now the time to tell it?
Well, there's kind of a backstory. When I was a student there, of course, Era was a big deal. He'd been coming off of a national championship year in '66. He was on the cover of Time magazine in '64. He was basically a national sports figure by the time I got there as a student. And really, the only time you got to see him was on the sideline, and he was part of the legend of Notre Dame football. And of course, we all, as students, bought into that. It was many, many years later that I found myself in the envious position, I guess, of getting to know him through a contact I made with the sports editor at the South Bend Tribune. I had written a book with my brother on the 1953 team. He thought, Joe Doyle, the sports editor, thought that was a pretty good book. And so he encouraged me to meet with the coach to write a definitive book about the 1966 season, which I did. And that book is titled Undisputed. It came out in 2010. And that led to a really nice, comfortable friendship for the remainder of the coach's life. And after he passed in 2017, Katie, his wife, who I also got to know, gave me a call and she said, "I'd like you to write Ara's biography." And she really was kind of a co-author with me. She made everything available that he had in his files, and she had a wonderful memory. We did over 30 hours of taped interviews. Of course, I interviewed a lot of other people, and it became a joint project. Of course, along the way, COVID interrupted the project, so it took us 4 years, a little bit over 4 years. But I'm delighted to report that it's now on the bookshelves. I saw a hard copy. A friend of mine got one from Amazon. It's the first copy of the hard book that I've seen so far.
Does it look like this? Oh, there we go.
That's it. You have a
There we
copy
go.
of it.
Yeah, I do have a copy of it.
You notice you didn't share the copy with me.
Well, I hope you read it.
I am pouring through it as well, not while we're doing this, but I have been, and it's great. One of the things that, as you just mentioned, I wanted to ask you about is that you had a chance to go through some of his personal files. Of the files that you went through, can you tell us one or two of the most interesting things that you found in there that you didn't know about him beforehand?
Well, there are a couple. The first is that everybody considers him to be Armenian in heritage, and a non-Catholic. And Era actually left behind a document, which is in the book, that speaks to the fact that his mother was French, and he was actually brought up in the Catholic Church for a number of years as a youth, although he was not a practicing Catholic, obviously. But so that's one of the surprises, and it was in his own words and his own description of it. There was a very, very poignant letter that was written to him by a friend of his father's after his father's death, that described how his entire family was basically slaughtered in Armenia. And so Eric really only had one living aunt. All of his uncles and his grandfather and grandmother on that side were actually killed during the Armenian Holocaust. And the letter is really, really poignant about the details. And if that hadn't been in the files, I'm not sure how I would have handled that, because it's a very complicated subject. And along the way, I think one of the surprises to me, and of course, everybody remembers the 24-23 win against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. But the surprise to me was that after that game, Era wrote a very long, detailed letter to Bear Bryant, who he was very friendly with, describing how much respect he had for them and the team and what a great game it was. And he was looking forward to future games. So it really spoke to the class of the guy that he reached out. He was very, very much a writer of things and saver of things. And so I had a wonderful resource for things that he actually wrote, said, or did. And it was all provided to me by Katie without restriction, by the way. It was just a wonderful experience to have all that.
You know, you mentioned the relationship with Bear Bryant there. He's somebody who came across great coaches all throughout his life from a young age, even when he enlisted in the Navy. Can you talk about how he ended up with Paul Brown, who ended up being, I mean, he got injured while he was playing there, but he said that the experience under him during his time in the Navy was a priceless experience.
I think it was meaningful in lots of ways. He first introduced the subject to me because when he was in high school, they would go to Paul Brown's high school, which had lights because they only played games on Saturdays, and in Massillon, Ohio, they had lights, so he was able to go see that. So he was aware of the coach. What's largely forgotten is that Ara played 1 year of freshman football at the University of Akron. So he had college football experience going into the Navy. So when he enlisted in the Navy, obviously the coach of the team at Great Lakes would have been aware of who college players were. And so he was able to then join the team that basically played college teams, the Great Lakes Naval Training Team. And that was under Coach Paul Brown. And I think being injured might have been a benefit because he got to spend a lot of time on the sidelines watching and listening to the coach and learning some techniques. And of course, that played forward later after he left college early because Paul Brown was the coach of the Cleveland Browns, and he remembered Ara, and then he figured out a way to draft him as a junior going into his senior year and paid him a bonus. And so that's how Ara got to the Browns. And then he had Paul Brown as a coach yet again. So he learned an awful lot from Paul Brown, good coaching techniques, good motivational techniques. And he readily admitted that. I mean, he had a lot of respect for Paul Brown.
You know, he had the opportunity to be around a lot of, I'll say, famous coaches, some great and some not so great in different ways. Jason has pointed out on many a show, me being a Michigan grad. So I'll ask the Ohio State question, which is, what was it like for him to coach with Woody Hayes, and what were the struggles that he went through with him?
Well, Woody Hayes is really one of the unsung heroes in the book for Ara's career because Ara got hurt in his second year with the Browns and basically was going to be out of football. And they were looking for a freshman coach at Miami of Ohio. Woody Hayes was the new coach there. And so the athletic director and others suggested that Ara might be a good candidate. And so he got the job as a freshman coach at Miami through Woody Hayes. And so that was really the big break. Woody gave him the lifeline to get him into college coaching. And he was very appreciative of that. There's a nice letter that he wrote to Woody when Woody was inducted into the Football Hall of Fame that spoke to that issue. And I included that in the letter. But Woody Hayes, and I got to meet him a couple of times, was a character. I mean, he was authoritarian, and he liked to kick things and bang things and whatever. And Ara was the junior coach, and so he had to take some of that. But lo and behold, after 1 year, Woody Hayes left Miami, and the opening for head football coach went to Ara, who had only coached 1 year of freshman football. And that was the big break that got him into head coaching as a very young man. So Woody Hayes is a pivotal figure in the story, actually.
So he finishes his time at Miami, and then he ends up as the youngest coach in the Big Ten when he takes the job at Northwestern at 32.
Right.
Did he end up at Notre Dame because they beat Notre Dame so bad in those 4 years, basically?
Well, that's part of the answer, but he had outgrown Northwestern by the time he wanted to move on. He knew that his time there had been well spent, but I don't think he was appreciated by the administration or the athletic director at Northwestern as much as he wanted to be. And of course, he struggled with being the smallest team in the Big Ten and having to play all the tough teams. So he was ready to go, and he was looking for a job. The beauty is that, south of Chicago, Notre Dame is actually probably the biggest college sports football team in the Chicago area. So the people in Chicago were aware of the fact that he beat Notre Dame 3 times. And I call those the luckiest losses that Notre Dame ever experienced, because he looked like a really good candidate for coaching Notre Dame. And we were really hungry for that kind of success. And of course, the rest is history.
Well,
Here's what
go ahead.
all right. So here's what confuses me. Every time I see people say that there's something in their yearbook and that it ends up that they actually do it, it's always shocking to me, and I need to actually see proof. How is it that in his high school yearbook it read destined to become the head coach at Notre Dame?
Well, that kind of jumped. There's like nuggets in writing the story that you fall on top of. One of them was that Ara was inducted into the Navy on the very same day at Great Lakes that my father was. So that was a surprise to me. But it was his niece that said, in the yearbook from Akron South, and she had her father's yearbook, that was Ara's brother. She said, the yearbook reads destined, it's like the prophecy first, destined to become the head coach at the University at Notre Dame. And you have to remember that in 1941, being the head coach at Notre Dame was one of the primary jobs in football. I mean, pro football wasn't as big a deal then. And Notre Dame, of course, was coming off of a legacy of pretty good football. And I think embedded in that is a lot of his classmates actually knew of his Catholic background. So it kind of all came together, and that was the prophecy that was put in there. That was a little chilling when I ran into that. I've tried to get a copy of the yearbook myself, and I've not been unable to do so. So if anybody's out there with an Akron South 1941 yearbook, please contact me. I'd love to have a copy.
I'm sure there's loads of those floating around.
You talk about what was in the yearbook, and he was the first non-graduate, non-Catholic to be the head coach at Notre Dame. But at the same time, you cover in the book that he had doubts about his worthiness to be the head coach there. Can you talk about his own kind of insecurities about that?
Well, I can talk about it, but he actually wrote it in his own words, that when he was selected to be the coach at Notre Dame, he was afraid that he would be perceived as a fallen away Catholic, and he didn't want to embarrass the school. And of course, he had grown up within the Catholic Church because his mother was French and Catholic. And it was really Father Hesburgh, Father Joyce, and Moose Krause that convinced him that no, that wouldn't be a problem. They were looking for a quality person. And of course, he was a quality person, and he eventually decided that if it was okay with them, that he would take the job. But it was kind of a moment of reflection for him. And it was the reason, I think, that he wrote this very long essay that I copied word for word in the book that explained how he was hired at Notre Dame and why he had those doubts. So other than his own words, I can't really expand much on it, except that I think he probably wanted to say something that would take Father Hesburgh and Father Joyce and Moose Krause away from having to, be responsible for his hiring when perhaps he thought he was unworthy at the time. Of course, at the end, he said, I wondered if I would have been perceived at Notre Dame if they had known. And the answer to that is he already knew he was loved and respected at Notre Dame by the time he wrote that.
When you look at today's coaches, it's a different era. Back then, coaches were harder on their players, just harder in general. It was a different type of coaching style.
Yes.
But what did you learn from knowing him and from talking to other people about his coaching style and how hard it was to play for him?
Well, this is really one of the heart parts. I mean, the heart of the book is, Ara lived until 94. He stopped coaching at age 53. He only coached in college for 24 years, and he's noted for that. So I went to trying to find out about his personality and his character, but as it related to his view of strategy and tactics and so forth. So I go at a great length to put in what I think is a good explanation of his playbook, of the things he expected out of the players' reaction. But it was very interesting. I've never met a guy that played for Ara that didn't have enormous respect, in fact, bordering on almost love at this point for the man, because he not only was an innovative coach, but he was really I'd say a genius in terms of being able to understand coaching situations. He was a very smart guy. And I think the team always knew they were going into a game with probably one of the smartest guys in college coaches as their leader. And they viewed him as a leader. And the other thing about him is he never played favorites. He took everybody that was on the team, from the walk-on player to the superstar coming out of high school, and they had to earn their way on the team, and the whole team respected that. So nobody felt like they were not able to play on the team if they, performed in practice and they did a good job. And it's everybody that ever played for him that I've met, and I've met hundreds at this point, say the same thing about him. He was just a really very, not only a good coach on the field, but a really good human being, and somebody they learned a lot about living life, and like they took a lot of lessons from him going forward in their lives.
You hear all of the players that did respect him, but again, as I mentioned before, it's a different era now. Can you picture Ara having been able to coach in today's game with today's rules, with today's players who have the entitlement to NIL and being able to transfer if they don't immediately get what they want?
I can't picture it. I wish he were here for me to sit down in his office like we did so many times and talk about it. He was adamant about college football being part of the college experience, that he thought that it was great for players to be able to get educations, but education came first, and that he would work around those things for the student to get what they wanted. And I think he would be, frankly, annoyed by some of the stuff we see now. Of course, that's relatively recent. Until 5 years ago, excuse me, nobody talked about those things. And now I think in my personal opinion, I'm not speaking for the coach, I think it's ruining college football. And I'm guessing that he might think the same thing.
You talk about how he treated all the players the same, from the walk-ons to the stars. One of those walk-ons is how I became more of a fan or somebody to watch Notre Dame, was Rudy. Rudy Rudiger, Parseghian saw his drive and gave him a place on the scout squad with the other coaches. What did Ara think about the Rudy story, him being in a movie about that? Did that surprise him?
Well, it's really funny because Rudy only played as a walk-on for Ara for one season, and he never got in a game where Ara was the head coach. And in the movie, I'm pretty sure that the notion that the coach would have promised Rudy he would play if he, in the following season, is not factual, because by that time Ara had made the personal decision to retire, and he would not have promised somebody something he could not fulfill. So Rudy's a very interesting character. His story, the arc of the story is true. A lot of the details are fictionalized to make the story enhanced, but the story is basically true. However, after Ara stopped coaching, he did have a relationship with Rudy, because Rudy was in town still in South Bend, and he started a small business doing home improvements. And Ara and his business partner invested in it. It didn't go well, but he knew Rudy, and some of his daughters knew Rudy from being about the same age. And so when the movie started to happen, Katie tells me that Ara was actually asked to play himself in the movie, and he declined to do it. But when the movie came out, they were invited to the opening banquet, sat with Rudy's parents, and were at the State Theater in South Bend for the premiere. And I think he was interested in the story because it was a story of perseverance and grit and so forth. And as I pointed out in the book, it's one of my favorite lines in the book, actually, is the assistant coach, Brian Bullock. I asked about Rudy. He said, well, make no mistake, Rudy worked his ass off. And then I ended this little segment in the book, I said, good things tend to happen to people who work their ass off. And I think that's how Ara would have viewed it.
You also mentioned Ara being the innovator. And whether it was his early adoption, basically, of analytics using data and stats to, make changes, or his use of kind of mental health and psychology in terms of rest to build up for the game that he got from Paul Brown, he was on the leading edge of a lot of trends that we now see in coaching. Can you talk about Ara the Innovator a little more?
Well, I think what you just said is in fact true, but he did some other things. One of the ones is he actually used video from the press box with a television screen on the sideline to study what had happened in the previous play. There was no replay at the time. So Notre Dame had a TV station. And so they got some equipment put up in the press box, and there was a person watching the video on the side that could say what was happening in the previous play. Well, the Big Ten banned that after the first year, so he couldn't use it in Big Ten games. He can only use it and then 2 years later, they banned it in college football. But he tried that, and it was kind of interesting. The other thing about it that he was very proud of was his ability to send in signals. In those days, coaches weren't supposed to send in signals, especially offensive signals, to the team. And all coaches did it in their own fashion. But Ara did it probably better than anybody because nobody figured out how he did it. And I was able late in his life to get him to stand up in his office and show me exactly how it was. And it was very subtle because it would be subtle, natural movements, like whether his hand was over the Notre Dame on his chest, or the Notre or the Dame on his chest, or whether the clipboard was in his left hand or his right hand. He was able to signal in a way that wouldn't attract the referee, and he never got caught doing it. And it was really kind of almost like ballet to watch him do it in his 90s so many years later.
I know it is killing Jason right now talking about sign stealing as a Michigan graduate. But I'm going to save that discussion for not bore Mark with it. But I am going to ask Mark about a question regarding Michigan and Notre Dame. So in my generation, Michigan-Notre Dame is a rivalry. When you were asked to come on the show to talk about this, people said, how do I feel about it? And I respect Ara and I respect your work, but there's a hatred that's only a little less than the hatred towards Ohio State when it comes to Notre Dame. Even though for people that are just coming up now, that rivalry kind of went away. Can you talk about how Ara helped revive that rivalry back in the 50s?
Well, the truth is, Ara never played Michigan at Notre Dame. In fact, Bo Schembechler was one of Ara's assistant coaches at Northwestern and remained a good friend of his throughout his life. And so he had there were some letters in the file from Bo, and he would kid Bo about that. So I got to meet Bo Schembechler because he had a good friend in Cincinnati, and I thought he was a wonderful guy. So from the standpoint of Ara's era, the Michigan-Notre Dame rivalry was never happened. The rivalry was with Michigan State during the time Ara was a coach. And of course, that was, all sorts of games that were important games in that era. But Michigan State played an Ara pretty evenly for the 11 years he was a coach. So the difficulty with Michigan is we hadn't played them in so long. It had nothing to do with Ara. I think it was because there was maybe bad blood going back to Rockney's era and Notre Dame not being invited into the Big Ten that kind of paused all that. And of course, it's a natural rivalry because of the border that we share with Indiana and Michigan. So I will tell you that I don't have this terrible hatred for Michigan. If you were to ask me which teams that I think we have the bigger rivalry with, I would say Southern California and probably Boston College, because we're both Catholic schools. So I think the Michigan games are great for college football. And of course, they got big stadiums and big audiences and they're quality programs. There's no question about that. So did I disappoint you in trying to stoke up a flame there?
Yeah, you know what? I got bad information. Part of the information that I got was, hey, by the way, Ara had something to do with bringing back the rivalry. I'm just glad the rivalry. I actually enjoy the rivalry. To me, college sports is about rivalries, and Ara and coaches who were able to develop rivalries, even if he wasn't responsible for the Michigan-Notre Dame rivalry. Right. I think that's what makes college sports great.
Yeah, I think we both hate Ohio State equally, though.
Amen.
Oh, I have no doubt about that. You guys can agree on that all day long. You know, Ara, all of a sudden at the top of his game, 53 years old, resigns in 1974.
Right.
Talk about why, and why is there so much misinformation and speculation after the fact?
Well, the misinformation and speculation, I think, was probably ginned up by a lot of sports writers who wanted to tell a story and didn't know the real information. And so I guess the adage is never let, the truth get in front, or, in the way of a good story. But Ara, and I've seen medical evidence of this, was totally burned out in football and stressed, and he didn't want to sacrifice his health or his relationship with his family for a job. And so he basically decided on his own that coaching college football was probably something that he should not do, or at least not do for a time. And so it was all his decision, but it was stress induced. I mean, it was purely stress induced. No external factors into why he left. He did it on his own. And there's all sorts of evidence to that in the files.
He was a busy man in retirement, whether it was his days calling games as a sportscaster with Keith Jackson and Brent Musburger,
right,
or the Ara Parseghian Medical Research Foundation that he founded in 1994. Can you talk about how he found fulfillment after his days on the sidelines?
Well, you're right, because from age 52 to 94, he lived a very active life. I'll go backwards from 94. For the last 20 years of his life, he was actively engaged from his 70s till his 94 in raising money for the Parseghian Medical Research Foundation, because tragically, 3 of his grandchildren contracted Niemann-Pick type C, which is an immune a disease with no known cure. And he dedicated his life to raising money and raised millions of dollars for that. That was his son, Michael's, and his daughter-in-law, Cindy's. 3 of their 4 children died of that. And so it was a tragedy, but he tried to turn the tragedy into a positive. After football, though, he, as you point out, he took a year off, and then he became, I think, a very able sports color guy in the booth, both for ABC and and CBS, and very well thought of by both Keith Jackson, who I got to know very well, and Brent Musburger, who Ara liked very much, but I've never met Brent Musburger. But he had, I think, an 11-year career on those 2 networks. And he liked that because he could go to the games, prepare for the games, but didn't have to worry about the score at the end of the games, and then just prepare for the next week. And he got to see all of his friends and got to be involved with college sports. And so he enjoyed that time in his life, I think.
Well, whether you're a Notre Dame fan, a college sports fan, or just a fan of somebody who kept pushing till he got to where he wanted to go, this book is for you. Mark Hubbard. The book is Ara, The Life and Legacy of a Notre Dame Legend, the authorized biography, Coach Ara Parseghian. We wish you the best of luck with it. And thanks so much for giving us some time to talk about it all.
Well, thank you for inviting me to your show. And I hope people enjoy the book. I will tell you, just as a matter of, I don't make any money from this book. All of the author's royalties are going to be donated to the Parseghian Medical Research Foundation. So it was a labor of love, and I continue to love the legacy of the coach and want to help the Medical Research Foundation any way that I can. So thank you for all that you can do to help us get that done. I appreciate it.
Well, Mark, know that a Michigan man has the book in hand and is reading it and is enjoying it, despite it's about Notre Dame.
Well, the question is, did you buy it?
No, actually, no. Sent it to us.
Well, go out and buy a book, then I'll be impressed.
We will make a donation.
But I actually do have one so that we get something to the foundation. Now that we know where it goes, Jeff will be willing to part with the money.
So, by the way, I'd be happy to talk to you guys again at any time that makes sense during the season. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you so much.
We encourage everybody to go out, not only read the book, but also donate to the cause. But actually, before you go, just a quick question. What was it like to have Rocky Blyer write the forward to your book?
Well,
And Rocky's been on our show. He's a great guy.
Well, Rocky's one of the really unbelievable people in sports history for all the reasons that people probably know, being injured in Vietnam and coming back, and 4 Super Bowl rings, 3 covers of Sports Illustrated. But I was made an honorary member of the 1966 team after writing Undisputed. And in the process of writing that book, I got to know the players pretty well, including Rocky. And Rocky and I become, actually, I'd say, pretty good friends, pretty close friends. And when I was approached by the publisher to get somebody to write the foreword, I said, well, there's one that comes to mind right away. And as soon as I mentioned Rocky's name, they said, oh, that's the guy you need. And I emailed Rocky. We talked on the phone, and it is, if you've read the foreword, it's a short but a wonderful piece of writing. In fact, when I do my speeches about the book, I'm going to read that first, and my next line is going to be, I think there's a beautifully written piece. I'm going to pause and I'm going to say, and I can say that because I didn't write it. And get a laugh that way. So Rocky is a big part of the story and a wonderful human being, a good friend.
Well, thanks a lot, Mark.
Good job. Good job getting that story out there. We look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Go Irish.
There you go. Oh. That hurts, Jeff.
We kept them on 30 seconds too long.
There you go.
Go Blue.
There you go.
30 seconds not enough.
And we were still doing the interview, so that'll make Eric, Jeff. So I got both of them for you. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you very much,
Mark. Take care.